Hello and welcome. We're here with the weekly update for reading the receipts, where we're going to kind of review the ongoing legal case between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni and kind of recap what's been going on, catch up to speed. You guys liked the other episode so much that we talked about, let's keep this going and do these weekly updates. So let's talk about where we're at this week and what happened, what new developments came up. So the first big piece of story that kind of came out was the protective order. The judge's decision, Judge Lyman's decision about the protective order came out, granting it as written by Blake Lively and Leslie Sloan and Stephanie Jones, their legal teams siding with them. A lot of the press kind of reported this as a win for Blake Lively, but that didn't stop some of the pro-Justin creators kind of saying, no, this is actually a big win for Justin instead. And a lot of the press around the protective order was talking about how this was about trying to hide evidence from the public, that Blake Lively was trying to keep her private text messages from the public. None of this is the case. So let's start out by talking a bit about the background about like what was this protective order? Why is it necessary? What's going on with it? So essentially what you've got is this case at its core is, the legal teams themselves have described this as a feud between competing PR firms. Okay, you have four different PR firms that are involved in this. You have Leslie Sloan's Vision PR, which represents Blake Lively. You have Stephanie Jones's Jonesworks, which did represent Wayfarer, but then obviously split with them. You have Jennifer Abel, who left Jonesworks to start her own company, RWA Communications. And then you have Melissa Nathan at the agency group. So you've got these four competing PR groups, and as we go through this court case, they're going to reveal information that might be sensitive and confidential. Things like their clients lists, their business plans, their financials, maybe things like that are talked about around the conversations that are interesting and relevant to the case. And they don't necessarily want some of that information going out to the public, and so there needs to be like restrictions on how that's disclosed. Now I should point out that as we're in this case, we're in the kind of gathering information phase, and those lawyers are going to throw the widest possible net, try to get as much information as they can, and just the other opposing lawyers are going to try and knock it down and restrict what they can see. But they're going to cast the widest possible net. They're going to bring in a ton of information. Not all of it's going to be relevant. Very little of it is actually going to be used in the court, which means we're not going to see any of it really. We have been spoiled with the amount of evidence that we've already got from the complaints, the evidence that they attach to the complaints, the timeline. And I think there's this sense of, as this case goes on, that we're going to be getting these big dumps of evidence, especially given that, Baldoni's lawyer, Brian Friedman, had promised like this website with all of the evidence on. There's this sense that we're going to be participants in discovery and we're going to see all this information. We're not, right? A lot of this information and this evidence isn't going to be seen. So even without the protective order, we weren't going to see a lot of this. The protective order is just basically to say, hey, we want to limit who gets access to the information so that we can kind of make sure that we can trace leaks, that there's this label on it that it is confidential so that people know you shouldn't disclose this to the public. So if it does get disclosed, then there can be consequences to that, right? You can't say, oh, I didn't know I wasn't supposed to say this. Now, both sides agree that there is a need for a protective order. So they both agree that there is a need of protective order. Wayfarer, their legal team have kind of put forth, Judge Lyman, the judge on this case, has a model protective order. He has, sample protective order that you can just use and get rubber stamped. And Wayfarer have suggested to use that. Blake Lively's team and Leslie Sloan's legal team and Jonesworks' legal team have all argued for a modified version of it that includes this attorney's eyes only designation. Now, the attorney's eyes designation is also in Judge Lyman's model order. So they both agree that there should be an attorney's eyes designation. And what that means is it's an extra level of confidentiality. That, let's say, Friedman asks Stephanie Jones for some information, some particular conversation, some email thread, and they want to provide it, but that in providing it, they know that there's information there that would be sensitive to their business, that they don't necessarily want Melissa Nathan to have, because as a competitor, it might give her a competitive advantage. It might reveal something about their business that would be damaging to them and give their competitor an advantage over them. So they could designate it attorney's eyes only, so that they could provide it to Brian Friedman and comply with that request, but Friedman wouldn't then be able to share it with his client. He could share it with the law firm and the other attorneys, but they couldn't share it with their client because it would be sensitive and damaging to the party that provided the information. Okay, just keeping up with chat here. You haven't been keeping up with this case. Yeah, well, that's what we're going to try and do, Linda, is kind of keep you up to date, these recaps. So hopefully it will make sense. If you have questions along the way, please call them out. I am trying to like explain this as though you're coming into this new. So if there's anything I miss, call it out in chat and we'll definitely cover that. And Ida says, very excited, this is during the daytime where I live, nice to be able to join. Haven't set the time for these weekly updates, so if this works really well for you, definitely give me that feedback, because this might work great for you, or it might be better for you in the evenings. Just let me know and we can set what time this is going to be on the weekly. Anyway, back to the case. So both sides agree for a protective order. Both sides agree on an attorney's eyes designation. So what are they arguing about? Well, like often in law, it is a very minor procedural difference that they're arguing about that doesn't really affect things in the grand scheme of things. It's really about how that process of getting attorney's eyes designation happens and what's the procedure for it. So Wayfarer and Judge Lemon's model protective order argues that if you've got sensitive information that you want to designate attorney's eyes only, then you have to go to the court first, and you have to petition the court and say, hey, I'm not going to hand over this information to the other legal team because I think it's very sensitive and confidential and I want it to be marked attorney's eyes only. And then the court will decide whether they agree with you and either give it that designation or just leave it as confidential. Blake Lively, Leslie Sloan, and Jones Works have all argued that instead for a modified version, where instead they are free to mark things as attorney's eyes designation, but if the other opposing legal team think that that is vital information that they want to share with their client, they can go to the court and petition that it gets downgraded to confidential, and the court will either agree with them or reject their request. So it's really just about where in the procedure you have to go to the court. Do you have to go to the court to get it to be assigned attorney's eyes only, or can it be just assigned attorney's eyes only and then you have to go to the court to get it downgraded? Where in that process is the court? Now, like I said, they've been unable to agree on this in meet and confer, so they ended up having a phone call with Judge Lyman and presenting their arguments live. I can't play you that phone call because you're not allowed to record it, but I did make notes, and so I'm just going to recap kind of what they were saying. So Leslie Sloan's legal team kind of reinforced that point that this is a feud between competing PR firms and that there's this sensitive business information. Stephanie Jones and Jones Works legal team agreed basically with all of Leslie Sloan's legal team's points, but also pointed out that this case already involves allegations that confidential business information was stolen and disclosed. They're arguing that Jennifer Abel stole confidential business information. And so the risk of that continuing, given that that is already part of the allegations in their claims, is pretty high. Leaking to TMZ has become a potential legal strategy. Yes, yeah. TMZ published a New York article and caused it to be published before the New York Times article. We're going to cover and talk about that in a little bit. Yeah. Lively's team pointed out that, not only is there the business of financial information, there may be information that has very low evidential value, right? It might not be relevant to the case, but it might have very high press value. It may have very high kind of value there. And they talked about what about a message or text exchange with a high profile individual? And they used the example of Justin Baldoni and him talking to a high profile individual, but it seems very clear the conversation is about possibly Blake Lively's high profile friends like Taylor Swift. And they were saying that, well, what if there's a conversation, right? If you could imagine a conversation where, let's say, and like I said, they use the example of Baldoni. I'm going to use the example of Blake because I think it's more relevant. Of Blake basically saying, I had a terrible day on set. Baldoni did all these terrible things. And, Taylor replies and says, oh, I had a terrible day too. XYZ is annoying me and I really hate him, or he's upset me. It's not relevant to the case, but TMZ would love to have that text message and then write a dozen articles on the feud between Taylor Swift and whoever it is. So they're arguing that there might be information in there that It's not terribly sensitive. It doesn't have like a financial, implication or a business implication, but it could be something that, given these individuals are celebrities, their business is fame and reputation. There could be conversations that aren't relevant to the case, have a high, press value and publicity value that they might be inclined to leak. They also pointed out that on both sides of this case, there are individuals who make money, right, as PR firms based entirely off trading information with the press, off the record and on background where, they're not putting their names to it. They're doing so, as an anonymous source. And this is standard practice for PR and publicity. And that they have bragged about doing this in an untraceable way. They also pointed out that days before the phone call, Wayfarer had leaked to the Daily Mail a list of witnesses that they really wanted to talk to, and the Daily Mail published an article. Now it's paywalled, but they published an article about here's who Brian Friedman wants to talk to. So they were already leaking sensitive details of the case to the press and generating press around it. I'm disappointed in Justin Baldoni and Jamie Heath. Yeah, I think this is all something that is very disappointing. Could have been very easily handled in a different way, and it is very disappointing that they didn't choose to handle it in that way. They seem very good at saying the correct things on the surface level. Yeah, and I think down the road we're going to be talking about that as well and taking bits of the Man Enough podcast, because I think there's a lot there to unpack that I think would be really useful as we continue this journey of unpacking misogyny and really trying to be safer individuals. That I think there's a lot there, a lot of material that we can look at and analyze. Okay, so Wayfarer's argument on that call was, look, if we do this, then there's nothing stopping the other legal teams labeling everything as attorney's eyes only, and then we have to keep going to court to fight to get access to this information. And that was really the basis of their argument. Lively's team pointed out that, well, that's the same problem that would be faced for all of the legal teams. There's nothing stopping Wayfarer labeling everything attorney's eyes only and then having to force everybody to fight. They also pointed out that Wayfarer have already subpoenaed dozens of third parties, including Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds' security team, asking for all documents relating to Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively. And that those two would likely have sensitive information, such as with the security team, like details of the security arrangements around Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni. You don't want to provide those to the man you are claiming is running a harassment campaign against you, right? The entire reason you need a security team and have upped your security, you don't want to give him the details of what you've done in response. So they're saying that if all of those third parties have to go to the court first, you're going to slow down the process and bog the court up with dozens of legal teams, having to go up and request all of this attorney's eyes only. They make the point that, in discovery, you collect all of this information. Very little of it is going to be used in court as evidence. So if you're going to make them go to court first to get all of the attorney's eyes only confidential information designated, that's a lot more request to the court than just being able to freely label things attorney's eyes only and then picking and choosing what you think is relevant that you need to share with your client and only going to the court to petition for those to get downgraded. That's a much smaller number of requests that go to the court. It will speed things up. Did I read all of the documents, including Stephanie Jones' lawsuit? Oh, to Edwin, yes. Did you even read any of the lawsuits? Edwin, we're on part 6 now, my friend. Go back and watch the other parts. We actually show the documents and walk through and read them, and that's what we're going to continue to do today. So yes. So the end decision there after the call was that Judge Lyman has decided to side with, Blake Lively, Leslie Sloan, and Jones Works, and give them a protective order where they are free to designate that attorney's eyes only. And I think here we have his memorandum. So is this a big win for Blake Lively or for Justin Baldoni? Neither really. Like I said, it's a procedural thing. It, I think, is a win for the case, because what it does is it speeds up discovery because they don't have to go to court first. It means that their information can flow freely. It will speed up the court case, which I think is good for everybody. It gets everybody faster to, getting a decision on this and, getting truth and justice, right? So if you're a fan of going through the legal process, that is what it's a win for. I do think, however, there is a yellow flag that is kind of raised here against Wayfarer and Friedman. I do think this decision is going to sting for for one main reason. When you make an argument to the court, you're essentially trying to, put forward your best arguments. And what you want to see in the judge's decision is that he has considered the arguments on both sides and sees the strengths of the arguments on both sides. You want to see him referring to these arguments and then referring to your arguments and showing their strength, and that maybe just, on the weight of evidence, maybe on, where he's feeling that argument just feels stronger, or, Lyman is, in his decision here, also talks about, like, he feels more inclined to, if we do the attorney's eyes only after, there's a chance that things could leak first, and that you can't really put the toothpaste back in the tube. So he's erring on the side of caution, right? And that would be fine, right? If he says, hey, there's strong arguments on both sides, but I'm erring on the side of caution, and so that's why I'm granting it on the lively side. That would be fine. That's what you want to see as a lawyer, right? That your arguments were strong, they were compelling, they were convincing, they just didn't win out on the strength of it. It's not what we see in Judge Lyman's decision, and instead he repeatedly calls out the poor argumentation of Wayfarer. Where are we? So let me go to what we're talking about here. So one of the big pieces first is here. He talks about, Blake Lively's accusing Baldoni of running a smear campaign, of going to the press, and of leaking information. Friedman has accused Sloan and Lively of doing the same thing. And he calls out here, Judge Lyman, that both the moving parties and the Wayfarer parties have accused opposing parties of providing private, sensitive, and confidential information to the media for their own business and personal advantage in ways that cannot easily be traced. So he's using Friedman's argument against him. He's saying, well, hang on, you're making the same claims that they're releasing damaging information to you. So of course we would want to side with caution and add in more protections. And he's doing that even if Wayfarer themselves don't think that that protection is necessary. Their arguments are kind of working against them because they're showing that, yeah, there's this free flow of information. I don't know anything about the judge, so they seem relatively media savvy. From what we've seen so far, again, I'm not a lawyer. I think I would refer to people who have legal experience to kind of go look at Judge Lyman's history and experience. He is, if I remember rightly, he was involved in a case with Rudolph Giuliani, so I think he's very easily knows about the media and how things work. I will say, from what I've seen of the case so far, and knowing nothing of Lyman, from what I've seen in his writing and on the call, he seems to be overly generous in assuming good faith, wanting to be transparent, and really kind of not letting, not to be seen as giving preference or deference to one side or the other, regardless of the allegations that are made. He's starting from a very clean slate of, I really want you guys to work things out. I really want there to be fairness, and seeing whether that gets proven out or not. So I have faith, like, and especially given, like, in this this decision, it seems a pretty fair decision. His reasoning seems to be, like I say, an abundance of caution. So it definitely seems like we have a good judge. Anyway, but again, I'm not a lawyer, so I wouldn't be able to spot a good judge from a bad judge anyway. So what do I know? Okay, so the next piece is, this conversation, like I said, about the security measures, right? Where Lively has said, hey, they've requested our security team's information and documents. Lyman makes the point that the Wayfarer parties have suggested that security measures are not relevant. They kind of were like, oh, we're not interested in that. I'm like, well, why did you subpoena a security team? And they talk about how, well, their objection was, we're not interested in that, but they didn't raise any objections as to why that information shouldn't be kept AEO. So there's definitely a need for helping to speed that designation up. So again, it's another part where their argumentation worked against them. And then finally, the other argument that Wayfarer made was that, we're only just beginning discovery. We haven't really started on this process. So it's premature really to have this discussion about what are we going to do about the discovery process and all of this. And again, Lyman says, well, look, okay, you've suggested that this is too early, and you keep trying to delay all aspects of this case, but that's not a reason why we shouldn't do this, right? Like, what we're looking for in this argumentation is compelling reasons for doing this or not, right? That it is too soon isn't a good argument, especially if, in the interest of, like, fairness and wanting to have a good case, like, we want to speed things up, right? There's no reason to say, oh, I don't think we should speed things up. I think we should, chill things down and slow things down. That's not a compelling argument. So again, I do think this On the surface, like I say, I don't think in terms of those of us outside of the legal profession, this is a big win either way because it's just a procedural decision. I do think, though, that within Wayfarer and in particular in Friedman's law offices, this is a bit of a yellow flag because it shows that their argumentation just wasn't compelling or convincing, right? And he's deliberately calling out the holes in their argumentation. And I think that is a warning because while it might not matter in the protective order decision, it's going to matter as we come to bigger decisions that have more impact, which we'll get to in a second. So in response, to this, like I said, there's been that spin, and of course TMZ, Friedman ran to TMZ to go talk about it. TMZ kind of described it as on the surface, a big win for Team Lively, trying to downplay them winning that argument, and then kind of reiterating Brian Friedman saying they want to reveal as much evidence as possible to defend his accusations, which is, again, another example of how in the press, Friedman is talking about they want to be transparent, they want to release this information. However, legally, when they come to make their legal arguments, they're arguing that, we shouldn't be providing call records. We don't want to, have this confidential designation to speed up the process. They're trying to slow things down, not give over discovery, and put obstacles in the way at every stage. So this is another reason why I'm like, look, we have to be careful because what Friedman is saying in public is not what he's saying in court. Just the fact that he stopped paying his own agent's boss's wife. What would I do with that guy breaking contracts around? Okay. So, Friedman carries on that, we are in fully agreement with the court's decision. If you were in agreement with the court's decision, why did you fight against it? Why did you file against this? So they're trying to play it as like, this is what we wanted. And we again, reiterating, we're not in care about security measures. Well, why did you subpoena her security team? And, then claiming that she's being overly broad, demanding documents for a 2.5-year period of time. And like, again, if you're trying to be transparent and say that you're going to give the evidence, why is that an issue? I'm reminded of somebody on Twitter. I talked about this and said, hey, what's the issue with handing it over? And somebody said, well, would you want to hand over your phone for 3 years because, there's bound to be something? And I'm like, no, I would absolutely. If I got subpoenaed for like the last 3 years of all of my DMs, phone conversations, and records, I would hand them over because there's nothing incriminating there. If you don't do stuff, you can't get caught doing stuff. And I think it's just that mindset of, well, of course he doesn't want to hand it over because of course there would be something incriminating. Like there would be if you do something incriminating. Okay, so that was the big decision. Like I say, overall, I think it's a bit of a sting for Friedman because it's a warning sign of when they come to the argument for more important things, which brings us to the motions to dismiss. So is this the Leslie Sloan opposition? Yes. All right, so motions to dismiss. The New York Times and Leslie Sloan have both filed motions to dismiss, and they're both largely about the same thing. They both claim that, firstly, there's an issue with group pleading, which is that Baldoni's complaint basically makes all of these accusations of defamation and of conspiracy and the smear campaign and all the rest of the stuff. It doesn't really define who did what. It just sort of says these people, all of this stuff, somehow there's a connection, and it doesn't draw concrete lines to who did what or specify what exactly was defamatory or all of this stuff. So they're complaining about, well, first off, there's an issue with this group pleading. Secondly, the other fight is about choice of law. Blake Lively originally filed her CID complaint, again, in California, to file there. She, in response, Justin Baldoni filed a defamation case against the New York Times in California. Blake Lively at the same time filed against Justin Baldoni again in New York, and Baldoni filed a countersuit against Blake Lively again in New York. So there's this issue of, as we consolidate all of these cases, is it New York law or California law? So they're arguing over the choice of law that should be used for this case. They're arguing over the defamation, saying that there isn't really specificity as to what was defamatory and that it was done so with intentional malice. Again, this is argued by both New York Times and Leslie Sloan. And then other pieces regarding the extortion and false light. One of the things against the New York Times is Baldoni's trying to argue that, let me see if I can bring it up, Megan Twohey's email. When Megan Twohey sent out her email, they talked about, we want to hear your feedback. We want to get comment from you by noon tomorrow. They're trying to claim that this was a promise not to publish the article by noon tomorrow, which that's not in here, and that the New York Times publishing the article early is somehow then breaking a legal contract. So those are the various pieces of what's being argued in the motion to dismiss. Now, the same day as the phone call, March the 6th, Baldoni had filed a response to Leslie Sloan's motion to dismiss. Just check chat. Leslie requested motion to dismiss to be clear she believes the smear campaign. Yeah, so Baldoni had filed it, and I think this is important to just cover, even though it was like the week before this week, as background, but also because these arguments kind of get referenced this week. So firstly, his main thing is that he argues there's over 24 requests for them to go amend their first amended complaint. Now, their motion to dismiss is supposed to be a defense of their complaint. And it is in part. They're basically trying to say there's nothing wrong with it. These are not deficiencies. The complaint as it's filed is fine. It's very damaging that there are also, like I say, 24 requests to leave to amend their first amended complaint. This is not one or two deficiencies. This is not a small minor point everywhere. There's 24 requests showing that there are significant flaws in their amended complaint that they need to go and amend. Now, you can file your complaint, you get it amended. For them to be able to amend again, I think the judge has to sign off on it. So this is them asking the judge, hey, we need another attempt to get this right. Typically, well, I don't know typically, because again, I'm not a lawyer. It would be helpful to their case, let me put it that way, if while they're asking for the ability to go amend, they included and attached their amended complaint. Because it would convince the judge that, hey, we fixed these deficiencies, we know how to do this, here's what it looks like with them, it's a compelling argument, grant us the ability to submit this amended complaint. They don't include it. And I think right now they're just running, they're being overwhelmed with how much they have to do. And I think it's a problem of, there are so many parties on the Wayfarer side that are all being represented by one legal team, and they're struggling. And I think that's going to start to be a bigger issue as well. State law is applied to trial parties and evidence. Federal law is applied to the trial process and subsequent appeals process. Thank you, Atticus. Always grateful for people who are smarter than me to come in here and help me. Friedman really needs to agree to the court to agree to amend to follow Cali law, not New York law. Friedman, yeah, and I do think that he's going to get permission to amend their complaint just because of how I think lenient and fair Judge Lyman has been. So I do think that's going to happen. What survives, we will see as we go through their arguments. But I wanted to point out that like their main case is like, we just need to fix this, which is not great, right? If you're trying to defend your complaint, saying 24 times that we need to fix it is rough. The other part in this is they allege that the reason they need to amend it is because they have new evidence. They've got additional allegations against specifically Leslie Sloan that they are wanting to add. The problem is they keep saying that they don't know what those are and they don't have evidence. In part of it here, they say that, we didn't deal with the group pleading and that we haven't specified what she said is because we don't know. The precise contours of the conspiracy will come into focus through discovery. They're asking for permission to go find the evidence to back up their complaint. That's also not great, right? This is exactly the definition of a fishing expedition. They don't know what, they don't know who said what, they don't know when, they don't know the details. They want to be able to go dig through everybody's personal information to be able to go spot that. That is a huge problem. They then also repeat this later on, again, when they're talking about, we want to be able to amend because, they're talking about, all the defects can be readily cured by amendment. They then go on to say, the Wayfarer parties are reliably informed and believe, and therefore can allege, that the Sloan parties engaged in a protracted campaign by which they contacted multiple reporters, including not only the New York Times, to spread offensive falsehoods and misleading information not just about Baldoni, but to each of the Wayfarer parties, and they did so in conspiracy with each of the other defendants. Big claims, right? They're saying, we can prove it. We can prove that not only did they talk to the New York Times, we know that they did it to other people. Of course, because the Sloan party's conspiracy was secretive and carefully concealed, the evidence must necessarily emerge through the discovery process. We got nothing. This is wild for them to put in their motion to dismiss. They're openly again requesting, we want to be able to amend our complaint, we want to add further allegations, but we also need discovery to give us the evidence to back that up. This is bad. They're basically openly admitting, we don't have anything. We don't have a compelling argument. We can't offer specificity as to what happened. We can't give you details about the allegations we're making because we don't have those details. Yeah, Friedman is making believe that Leslie started the smear campaign and Leslie and Stephanie were blindsided. Yeah, but we already have their text messages showing that that's not the case. Why can't he name a single one of the falsehoods? Exactly. It's a huge part of, like, if you're going to claim defamation, that you're able to offer some specificity as to what was said, when, by who, and that they did so with a malicious intent. So he's not able to put any of that. So anyway, that was their kind of response to the motion to dismiss. So this week we got Leslie Sloan basically coming back, and it is a solid burn against Wayfarer. So, you know, first off, where are we? I think it's in this one, right? They go off and talk about, you know, having reached the obvious conclusion that their complaint is indefensible, that they failed to attach that proposed amend pleading. Like I said, they failed to give you the amended pleading that would fix their defects. They just don't even have it yet, right? Which is, again, damages their argument. It's very different if you say, we can fix the defects, here it is fixed, you know, grant us leave to file this amended complaint. It's another thing to say, trust me, bro, which is what they're trying to say. And it says, you know, instead they vaguely asserted they have attained additional information and expect the court to take their word for it, but no amendment or additional information could fix their complaint. It's bad. They carry on, kind of, you know, pointing out they don't fix the giant completing, and they say that, you know, the Wayfarer parties concede as much, admitting that they have that they're not going to fix it. They can't defend their claim. They can't defend their argument. Sorry. And so they're just going to fix the group pleading issue. And it says, but they've already been given 2 opportunities to submit an actionable complaint and have failed both times. Again, they're calling out that, like, there's nothing to this. If they had anything, they could defend it. The other part is they talk about in here that, you know, where the issue is with, like, defamation was with Leslie Sloan kind of talking to the Daily Mail, and we've kind of shown these text messages, that, you know, the whole cast doesn't like Justin and the whole cast hates him. Now, Sloan's kind of arguing that this is just a matter of opinion. Wayfarer coming back and saying, no, those are meant to be interpreted as statements of fact. Again, Sloan comes back and says, well, no, like, there's no support for saying that these are statements of fact. What could there possibly be? This is a great argument because it's a freaking trap. I love this when I saw this when it came out, because the whole reason that you would take the statement, the whole cast hates him, the whole cast doesn't like Justin, as a statement of fact is because at the time, remember, they were concerned about the fact that the cast didn't want to do press with him. They didn't want to appear at the premiere with him. This is what caused that article to be written, and why the Daily Mail were reaching out to Leslie Sloan in the first place was, hey, we're seeing all this chatter about why they don't want to be seen together. What's going on, right? So for Wayfarer to come back to say, well, you know, the reason it would be interpreted in this light is in the basis of there's all this rumor of the cast not wanting to be with him. Well, then, if there's statements of fact that, you know, the whole cast doesn't like him, and it's based on the fact that the whole cast doesn't want to be seen with him, well, then this is a statement of fact. And if it's a statement of fact, it's not defamatory, right? The reason that it would be interpreted as a fact is because there is other evidence supporting it that it is actually a fact. Defamation fails because truth is a defense, right? Saying that the whole cast doesn't like Justin when the whole cast refuses to appear with him is a defensible claim. It's not defamatory. So they point this in here. They put this in here, knowing that this is a bit of a trap for Justin, and I think they kind of call it out a little bit further down here that, you know, uh, if they do find that her statements are statements of fact, those facts are true, pointing out that there was concern about Justin being ousted, shunned, and iced out, as well as his innocuous improvisation during filming. So they also point out that the Wayfarer parties do not dispute the truth of those specific allegations, and instead argue that substantial truth is a question for the jury. So they're saying, look, the fact of whether the cast hated him, they're kind of sidelining and not even talking about. It doesn't help that Wayfarer has been disparaging Discovery and amending the other side of stalling the lack of a case. Yes. And it doesn't help that Wayfarer have been stalling the case from the very beginning, from even when, the waiver of service, they have constantly been dragging their feet. So I think everybody's tired of it at this point. It's proven that Heath tried to keep Stephanie from finding out about the hiring of Melissa and Nathan. I don't know if he tried to keep her from finding out, but they did keep Stephanie from talking to the press when they were labeling Stephanie as the leak to the Daily Mail, which even Melissa's Nathan's text to her sister say that Stephanie's not involved. So, yeah, when we get the rest of those conversations and text messages, I think that's going to be pretty bad for them. But anyway, the other interesting part about all of this is that, I talked in I think it was the Wednesday, the part 3, where we talked about the smear campaign, how they had misrepresented the conversation with the Daily Mail to kind of suggest that Leslie Sloan was calling Baldoni a predator, or, that he'd sexually assaulted, and all that kind of stuff. And that was a conversation that happened after the CRD complaint came out, and it was the reporter's words. It wasn't a direct quote, and they kind of called this out in here. So, in their opposition to the motion to dismiss, Wayfarer called out that Sloan kind of called Baldoni a predator. But the problem with it is, as they point out here, they haven't said where she said that statement, who she said that statement to. They cannot provide the exact words. All they've said is that this predator, in quotes. In his evidence, in his timeline, Melissa Nathan makes reference to the fact that she has a text message that includes that. We never get to see that text message. It's not included in his evidence. He doesn't show us anywhere. And this is what, Leslie Sloan's calling out here. He's alleging that she's done this. He's not providing any information to back up when, where, or whatever. He's just saying she said it. And that's a huge flaw again. Like, if you're going to make these claims, he's got to be able to back it up and say when, where, and ish. But finally, I think this is something really to call out. And I talked about this, I think, Fridays. I think I talked about this on Friday's live stream. What Wayfarer are alleging is they had a conversation with James Vitsuka, who had talked to Leslie Sloan. I think we talked about like August 8th, 7th, 8th, 9th, around that period, about this news article that was written. They then talked to James Vitsuka after the CRD complaint came out, after December the 20th, trying to get his conversations with Leslie Sloan, when they realized that, oh, we're in legal trouble. And in that conversation, James Vitsuka had said to Melissa Nathan and Brian Friedman that Leslie Sloan had never mentioned sexual harassment. Not once did she mention it to him. And now she's claiming that she's been sexually assaulted, referring to the CRD complaint that came out on December 20th. Now, Wayfarer are trying to use that to say, see, he's saying that Leslie Sloan said that she was, Blake Lively was sexually assaulted, which not the case. He was referring to the CRD complaint. But anyway, they bring up the point that even if, right, this was true, even if Leslie Sloan had said that, Lively's public allegations of unconsented touching and kissing fall within the definition of sexual assault. This is a big deal, because I don't think this has really been talked about and really brought up. And especially given that, from what we saw in the evidence, and I kind of showed this in his own timeline. You have to give me a second, because I did not plan to bring this up, but I'm going to, right? So this was like the August 8th, 7th stuff, right? Where they're working on that information, where the Daily Mail article comes out about him being a chauvinist and abusive. And, they were celebrating and saying, I don't think this article is that bad. I think it's fine. Not only that, but, when they're talking about the HR complaints that get leaked out, right? Oh, it's page 48. That page I remember pretty well. when they're talking about the TMZ leaking, the HR complaints get leaked to TMZ, and TMZ reach out to say, what about the 3 HR complaints? They talk about, hey, we position it as the claims that are already out there about the unwanted kissing. So his PR team were totally comfortable with the press talking about Justin unwantedly kissing Blake Lively. So this idea that, Blake Lively's publicist is talking about sexual assault. She didn't. You can't tell us where she ever did. You've got no evidence for it. You can't tell us the day, the time, or the statement that did. But even if she did, the claims that you yourselves were putting out there and were comfortable with fall within New York's definition of sexual assault. This is bad, right? And I think, like I said, I think this is a big deal because it's very important to call out, because I think it does protect, when we're having this conversation about Justin Baldoni and that his team were putting out that, oh, it was just unwanted touching, it was just unwanted kissing, it was improvised kissing, and that's what she made her uncomfortable, it wasn't anything else. That is not just sexual harassment, it's sexual assault. And obviously that is incredibly uncomfortable for that to kind of sit on Justin Baldoni and those allegations and the damage it does to his reputation. But it's an important thing to call out, because I don't think this is wrong, and it'll be interesting to see how that's even argumented against and pulled out, because again, I think I don't see how you argue against that. But anyway, and again, I'm not saying that to put it out to make these giant claims against Justin Baldoni. I think it's just an important point that Leslie Sloan's legal team called out that nobody else has been calling out of. In actual fact, if we're talking about reputational damage and the issues that we're going to talk about, and like this whole defamation, the claims you were putting out there that his own team were comfortable with the news reporting on meet a much higher criteria of reputational damage that they were doing to themselves in order to kind of get people from not talking about, oh, he was, there's this long pattern of sexual harassment on set, instead trying to downplay, well, it was just kissing. Why is she being weird about it? They were, actors, and this is normal, and trying to downplay and normalize what is very serious misconduct. Okay, so the other thing that got filed was Justin's response to the New York Times motion to dismiss. I talked about his response to Leslie Sloan's, included just basically a ton of requests to amend. It's basically the same in here. There's about 5 or 6 requests for leave to amend. And so again, he's kind of trying to defend his complaint as properly pled and is totally fine, and then also saying, hey, a ton of requests to basically say, we need to go fix this. I've had a long problem with his legal documents as an outsider, again, with no legal experience, because when I read the CRD complaint, it's very dry, it's very legal, it's, we make this claim, we show evidence and a text message that's relevant to the claim. Baldoni's has, from the very beginning, been written like a PR article, like a Reddit thread. It doesn't feel very legal. And then, as he's going into these motion defense, as we talked about, he's just lost the protective order, right? He really needs to step up his game, or his legal team needs to step up their game, really kind of get to some serious, real, solid lawyering. They had, I think it was 2 weeks to work on their response to the New York Times motion to dismiss. And it starts out with, a pietistic bastion of media establishment, the New York Times has long presumed itself beyond accountability. Not here. Like, I start to feel like his team have given up lawyering entirely, and they're just writing press releases, right? Knowing that people are going to cover this and report on this, because this is bad. His other documents, like I said, you can see the difference in how they're written. This one just goes off. It was filed last minute on a Friday. It feels like it was written last minute on a Friday. It's bad. And I'm not saying that because I'm Team Lively, because I have this kind of deference to believing victims and wanting to see this go to court. I say this because, like, it's just badly written. And I think it really, I don't see how the New York Times motion to dismiss doesn't go through. I think it'll be interesting to see whether it gets dismissed entirely or in part, and what survives. But if this is the best they've got, they're not going to win this. So let's start with, like you say, he's got the opening statement here, and he comes into this group pleading claim, right? So that they don't have specificity to what and who. And his basic response to it is, well, it's too premature for the Wayfarer parties to specify the acts taken in conjunction with its scheme with the Lively parties. He's saying that we don't need to fix the group pleading because it's too early. This is incorrect. This is not going to be a convincing argument. If you look at Blake Lively's complaint, it very clearly specifies what each person's role is, where they acted, when they brought in the other actors. We've seen like what date, what time, when they brought in Tag, what they did with Tag, what their plan with Tag was, when Tag brought in the social media firm, what their job was, what they were doing, all of the exchanges between them to show the different pieces. And her CRD complaint, when it makes its oh gosh, I can't remember what it's called, but the bit at the bottom where it actually makes its claims against the individuals, it's very clearly, these guys participated in this, these guys did this, and so on. Wayfarers doesn't have that, and they're saying, well, it's too early. This is not true. The other parties are able to do this. They are not, but they're not able to do this because they don't have the evidence to back it up. They can't say these things because they know too well they're making these claims baselessly without any concrete information to solidly back them. And them admitting it in this, again, I think it's pretty damaging, especially given the protective order and this kind of red flag of you need to step up your argumentation game. It feels like I've given up. I don't know what else to say. So when they come to the argument of choice of law, the New York Times has kind of said, well, look, this is an article that was written by a New York Times reporter, written in New York, with individuals, provided by information from individuals who reside in New York. So the choice of law argument really, and in other suits that are like similar to this, comes down to where the defamatory article emanated from. So they're saying, look, New York Times, New York reporter, from information from New York residents, very clearly emanated from New York. Their response is, well, we'll need discovery to reveal where it came from. They talk about how they don't know which servers it was uploaded on, so we don't know, where it emanated from, which I don't know why that's important, especially when, we talk about cloud storage and stuff like that. It's very likely those servers are not anywhere near where the article emanated from. But they point out that, our amended complaint doesn't make the allegation of where it alleges from. So if the choice of law argument, as they've shown with precedent and case law in the New York Times motion to dismiss, shows that the deciding factor is where the article emanates from, Wayfarer is saying, hey, we don't know where the article emanates from, and we didn't make a claim where it emanates from because we don't know. Therefore, California, really bad. Again, it's not just that they don't know, but they don't have a compelling argument as to why it shouldn't be where the article emanated from, which, as the New York said, is we can easily show you that it emanates from New York. So again, like, they're just not making strong, compelling arguments in response. But it gets worse. So having gone there, they then go down to where is it? I'm trying to find it about the headline. I can't find it. I thought it was page 19, but okay. Their next line of defense is, okay, we can't show you where it emanated from, and we didn't put it into our amended complaint because we don't have the evidence and we don't know where it emanated from. But here's the compelling argument. The article itself, the New York Times article that they wrote, I have it up here, don't I? Did I not? I thought I had it open. Oh, I didn't. Itself says a Hollywood smear machine. And so they're saying, well, because the title of the article that the New York Times wrote has Hollywood in the title of the article, then therefore means that it's a California interest. Wild stuff. Like I said, for this to be in here is insane. Like that they think this is a compelling argument. So they're saying because this says Hollywood here, that's why the choice of venue for the law should be California. Um, very wild. They're just taking his money at this point. I said this when this came out on Friday. I said to post it on Twitter and Threads, and I said, I don't know what Wayfarer will build for this 36-page article. They deserve a refund because this is terrible. This is really bad. The next part of this though is when it comes to like the defamation, they struggle to kind of point to what kind of statements instead were defamatory, and so they come up with this idea that well, you know, the title of the argument says Hollywood smear machine, and so it's implying the existence of a smear machine, of an actual like smear machine, that therefore it's implying that Wayfarer were part of it. And when they said that Wayfarer operated waged a smear campaign, they're kind of by association alleging that Wayfarer operated a smear machine that waged a smear campaign, and so because that goes beyond what Blake Lively had said in her CRD complaint, this is where the defamatory statement is. So they're saying that basically if you take bits of this sentence and then you add on where it says that, you know, they were waging an undetectable smear campaign, and you kind of smush those together and kind of picture in your head Wayfarer operating a smear machine and waging smear campaigns, that's defamatory. This is wild. That they are basically chopping up bits of the article and smushing them together to try and make their defamatory argument. Again, this is, I mean, I don't want to say this lazy because there's a lot of effort that's gone into dreaming up this argument. This is actually a lot of work. It's not convincing in the slightest, and I think again this is why it's going to lose them. Smear machine still seems true though. It does, and when they talk about it in the article, they talk more not about Wayfarer, but about Melissa Nathan. You know, that she had, you know, a history of doing this for other people, so for Johnny Depp and Drake, Travis Scott, and she talks about that. They don't really allege it to Wayfarer. They're saying that they hired a PR crisis firm with a history, right? So this is why they're having to smush these two bits together, because there isn't really any direct implication here saying that Wayfarer themselves have, you know, waged multiple smear campaigns. Instead, that they hired a PR firm that has. So yeah, like I say, and then there's the 5 kind of requests to, you know, amend their complaint. So again, I don't think this is going to go too well for them. So that's everything that kind of came in this week. We got any questions in chat? Possible Freeman's playing to a potential appellate court where he can argue he should have been given liberal ops to amend retrial. Again, and I think this is why Lyman's going to give them the ability to amend, because I think he's going to be overly fair and overly generous to basically say, hey, we're going to strike down all of this stuff. I think these motions to dismiss are going to be dismissed for the most part. I think most of these claims are going to go. And then I think he's going to give them permission to be able to amend and sort it out. Just because I think as well, you know, if the majority of claims against Leslie Sloan go, if the majority of claims against the New York Times go, there's going to be a need for them to just basically sort out what's left. And I think that would probably be best done by an amended complaint. The other thing to bring up is kind of, what was it? Coming into next week, right? What next week's update is going to be. The deadline for Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds to file their motions to dismiss is also this week, right? I think it's March 20th. So those are going to come up this week. And so I think we're going to wait and to see there, because I think, again, Ryan Reynolds is pretty easily got a good, strong motion to dismiss based off the same arguments, that there really isn't that specificity. They can't really state what Ryan Reynolds' involvement in all of this is without any evidence. So I think all of that gets taken down. And I think, like I say, once all of that dust settles from those motions to dismiss, there's going to be a much smaller surface area for this complaint, and I think it would probably be best served by an amendment to strip it down to, okay, make a solid case against Blake Lively here. Heck, they smeared WME and Sony too. Yeah. This becomes a problem when one lawyer represents defendants with different interests as a group. This box makes sense for Melissa Nathan and others. And that was what I was going to close out with. So great point, Kim. Great point. Because what we did see this week as well is kind of a shift in messaging from Justin Baldoni's camp. This story kind of came out and has been pushed this week of that, you know, his lawyer said that he never wanted to hurt Blake Lively, that all of this was intentional. He never wanted to hurt her. And I think the quote is before all of the legal complaints. You know, he said, I'm more than willing to take every text message out there, lay them out and put them on. He hasn't done that. They're fighting their text messages becoming out there. Like I said, they've been fighting discovery the entire time, so it contradicts. But I think this is the beginning of that. I've talked to Kim about this, that I think a number of people, myself, but also people who are far more versed in this world with more legal education, who are actually, you know what they're talking about, have said this as well, that having all of these different clients represented by Brian Friedman is an issue for them because they do have competing interests. That I think as this case goes on, there's an interest of Wayfarer kind of distancing themselves and saying, well, you know, this smear campaign and this work was mostly done by Melissa Nathan and Jennifer Abel, and we didn't really know exactly what was going on. We were kept in the dark, especially when it comes to the activities of like Street Relations and Jed Wallace. There may be a good defense there of saying, we hired them and they kind of promised one thing, and what they were actually doing, oh gosh, we had no idea about, right? And I think it also might behoove Jennifer Abel to kind of make that argument of, well, I was just told to pass this information on from Wayfarer to Melissa Nathan. I didn't plan or plot anything. I was just kind of like a go-between passing information. I don't know legally how strong those arguments are, whether they're worth making, but I think I just pointed out to say, at some point they're going to have conflicting interests, and all of them being represented by Brian Friedman isn't going to work. I think this article is kind of like the beginning of Justin trying to distance himself from the work of the other people. I don't think it's just him responding to the hate and harassment that everybody's getting. I think it's the beginnings of that, and I think as we go through this case, we're going to start seeing that those parties break apart, need to get their own legal representation, and I think every lawyer who looks at this case would probably already advise all of the Wayfarer parties, you need your own legal representation, because I do not think Brian Friedman is operating in your best interest. Even if we just talk about him constantly going to the press and making these statements, because the issue is every time he makes a statement, you know, this then also becomes something that can be used in court. If he says something to the press, which when it comes to trial, he then denies and says, oh, something else completely different, they can use that against him. Oh, you said this to the press. Now you're saying this. So the more he says, the more he kind of hurts their legal case. Again, I've talked before, this is exactly why lawyers tell you, shut up, don't say anything, right? You know, get your lawyer and have them. Don't have lawyers going constantly talking to the press, because it's going to hurt and damage your campaign. So I think we're going to see that coming as well, that eventually they're going to get their own legal representation. And I think we're starting to see the beginning pieces of that fracturing. And that may happen as a result of the motions to dismiss. And then, you know, if there's this amended complaint, as that kind of gets consolidated, then, you know, maybe they start to see that, hey, my interests aren't served by the amended complaint. I'm not being fully represented, and I don't have a strong case. It's time to get my own representation and build it from that way. So there we go. Wayfarer could easily throw Justin Baldoni under the bus. They could. I'm kind of, again, we're going into speculation, right? Because none of this is known. I don't typically go into this territory because I much prefer to go off what we know, or what we can know with reasonable amount of intent. But to speculate for you a little bit, I don't know which way it's going to go. I've thought about this for a little while. Is it going to be that you want to save and salvage Wayfarer as a studio and throw Justin under the bus, you know, and get rid of him? Is it that you want to salvage Justin and throw Wayfarer under the bus, right? Create a new production company, say that they were the problem, and keep him as this kind of poster boy this idea that there's this rumor that basically Steve Sarowitz was trying to kind of build up Justin and is invested in Justin as kind of like the Baha'i Tom Cruise, if you will. I don't know, right? It's going to be what we're going to see as this comes out. But again, all speculation, all gossip and rumor. This is not anything that we should take with any kind of seriousness or credibility, right? Like this is just brainstorming and fun fantasy, right? None of that is anything that we know. But again, like I say, this week we should see motions to dismiss from Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds, whether they file together or separately. That'll be interesting. And I think, yeah, that's what we'll come up with. So if you have any questions over this week, please let me know. Drop them in the comments below or reach out to me. Otherwise, thank you so much, everybody, for coming today and hanging out with us this morning. I appreciate you all. Thanks for keeping me company, chat. If you like what we're doing, like, comment, share, boost it, help get this out to other people. I appreciate all of the support, engagement, and just encouragement and feedback that I've had so far. It's been great, so thank you. That's why we're doing this on a weekly schedule, and I will let you know when we got what date works best for this going forward. But in the meantime, I will see you next week. Have yourselves a great rest of your weekend, and thanks again for tuning in. Take care.